Okay, I'm going to actually just do a brief introduction of Mark. We're very lucky to have Mark today. He's MD and Head of New Partnerships at Bridge Builders STG. I did read that he has a very interesting history. He started his career as a theatre actor in New Zealand. He's worked as a trainer, facilitator and a leadership coach. And he's also an author. Now, I won't waste too much of our precious time today, and I'll pass you straight over to Mark. Mark, welcome.
Thank you very much, Janet. I hope you can all hear me okay. And thank you for that lovely introduction. This is a subject that's very dear to my heart, so I'm delighted that so many of you have also been curious enough to come along and look at it. It's also an area that I dare to hope is becoming increasingly vital, critical, and valued in the various work that we're doing and the things that we're paying attention to in that work. So I have some propositions around that for you. I'll be very interested to hear your thoughts as well as your questions around that. Just building on what Janet said about me, all of the work that I do is around what we've always called the soft skills, the human skills. So I work in organizational and individual communications. I work in leadership development, and a lot of the work that I do is in organizations working with team relationships and collaboration. So relationships sort of sit very much at the heart of everything that I do. And the other thing that I'd quite like you to know about me is I'm a pragmatist. So as well as the ideas, if I get this right, you will get some tools, by which I mean something you can use to fix things with, or to build things with, or to make things with, that you can use in the work that you're doing. Click please, Janet. Here's the route map for the areas that I thought we'd cover in the initial part before we throw it open to a conversation on this topic. I want to kick off with a proposition. I'm not alone in making this, but see what you think of this. My proposition being that relationships are now at the epicenter, the engine room, if you like, of everything that we do at work. They have a new central necessity. So I'd like to just kind of give you a way of sort of looking at that and bring in some of the research that's supporting that idea, with the claim that relationships now is the main thing, rather than a necessary cosmetic niceness. Perhaps it sort of sits around the edges of the results, the bottom line that's driven us perhaps in the past. See what you think of that. From there, I'd like to look at some of the things that I think we can learn from the new studies into the conditions of flourishing, as opposed to what we need to do to survive, firefighting, crisis management, just keeping up. If we turn our attention instead to what we're increasingly learning from the new science of happiness at work, from understanding the conditions and qualities of flourishing, from neuroscience, from all of these new studies that are thinking about what we can learn from success and achievement and strength, what does that give us to take into the aspirations, the ambitions, the needs that we have in terms of building, maintaining, and nourishing relationships. And then the third part is to think about communication. And in some ways, we might say that communication is the best and all we have to build relationships with. It's certainly the main thing that we have. And so to actually look practically at some of the tools and techniques that we might be able to pull from some of the new thinking, particularly thinking about conversational intelligence, the new relationships intelligences that we're understanding matter more and more to make flourishing relationships. So that's the route map. Click please, Janet. See what you think of this initial proposition. Here's how I'm now picturing it. In the past, I think we've tended to think of relationships and results like this, at opposite ends of a continuum. And obviously what this does is immediately imposes a dichotomy. And I think a lot of our past practices and thinking have tended to emphasize this polarity, where we find ourselves concentrating on the results we need to achieve at the expense of the relationships involved. So in the past, we've often talked about task or result-oriented people who are different from perhaps people with more of a relationships or values or process-focused bias. Our old ways of thinking about left and right brain thinking have also underscored this false choice between giving our attention and energy to one end of the continuum or the other. Make your choice. But in today's world of work, I think it looks much more like this. Click, please. With relationships now at the center of everything that we do, I would suggest that most of the work that we're now doing is concentrated and dependent upon expert and excellent relationship working. In our world of work that now trades in knowledge, in services, and in experience, all of our most important results are utterly dependent upon the relationships we're trying to build them from. Click, please. There's also, I would suggest, an essential and symbiotic relationship between the strength of our relationships and the quality of our communications. Click. And we also now know that a great deal of how engaged people feel at work is completely dependent upon how happy we are in our relationships. For instance, one of the things that we know that causes unhappiness at work, when people score badly on how happy or engaged they feel at work, the number one problem is in the relationship with line managers. People not feeling recognized, appreciated enough by their line managers. That relationship is pivotal to the extent to which people feel happy or engaged at work. It's equally important for our external relationships. The quality of the relationships we are able to make with our customers has a direct impact on how loyal our customers will be for us. One of the programs that I'm running a lot at the moment is looking at the skills involved in dealing with dissatisfied customers. And of course, we're all expert customers now. We're all very clear about what our rights and our entitlements are. But we know from multiple studies that when people feel well treated, well looked after, even when they don't get what they wanted, they will still report a high level of satisfaction, happiness with the organization. So the way in which we're treated, the way in which the relationship is made with us matters and will trump what we actually get in terms of the outcomes. Click, please. The excellence or effect of our relationships also has a knock-on effect to our willingness to stretch outside what is comfortable, what is familiar for us, and do things that are different. So this means that the quality, the excellence of our relationship has a direct correlation with the amount of learning that's going on at individual and collective levels, our willingness to adapt to change, and for most of us, constant, unpredictable, uncertain change is not something we're just having to get through, but actually the new normal, the new ongoing situation that we're going to have to learn how to deal with on a permanent level, I think. And then from that, of course, innovation, being able to constantly adapt and reinvent ourselves in response to those new circumstances or conditions. So that financial capital, which used to be the most important thing, the thing that kind of ruled and trumped all else, is now finding that it's utterly dependent upon the relationship capitals, our psychological capital that we have as individuals, our social capital that we have in our relationships, in our groups, in our partnerships, our cultural capital, and our ability to work and use the magnificence of our diversity. Here's a couple of things to sort of back up this, and it's not just me that's saying this. In their foreword to the 2014 Future Thinking paper, Tomorrow's Relationships, Unlocking Value, the authors write this: we need to close the gap between what is said and what is done to build relationships that are resilient and robust and ensure lasting success for the organization over the short, medium, and long term. This requires authenticity, trust, and engagement in relationships. I like this. It's not organizations that have relationships, they remind us. It is the people within and between those organizations. This means that a relationship with another person cannot simply be a means to an end, but a necessary end in itself. And they go on to say further that they now estimate 4/5 of an organization's value, that's 80%, is in intangibles. So financial capital there is being given an actual numerical quotient of only 20%, if you like. Goodwill, for instance. You can't see goodwill on a balance sheet, but most of us know how absolutely essential this is to many of the things that we're trying to achieve and make happen. Here's a quote from one of the leaders that the Tomorrow's Relationship Report cites. This is Kevin Murray, chairman of the Good Relations Group. He says, you cannot manage reputation. Reputation is a consequence of what you do, how you can engage with people, and then what they say about you. We have to earn their trust, and being trustworthy has a monetary value. And then the conclusion from this report, the overriding message from our research bears out that the human dimension, relationships with customers, with employees, with partners, and with communities will be the key to sustaining success in the long run. So this is my sort of initial suggestion, that the first thing perhaps that we need to do is shift our thinking about relationships as something that is in competition or something that is in addition to achieving high quality results, the needed results, and actually start to be thought about as the pivotal, the critical thing we need to get right in order to actually have any hope of being able to achieve any of the other things that we might aspire to do. And do please ask me any questions at the end if you have questions about any of that thinking or those different relationships intelligences. But if we accept this proposition, the next question then that I want to move to is how? How can we do this? And this is where I would like to have a look now at some of the new thinking. And actually it's quite surprising perhaps that the question that how do we make flourishing relationships, we've only been asking relatively recently, certainly with any real rigor or discipline. But to actually ask what makes a flourishing relationship is exactly the kind of question that's now being asked, as you may know, by researchers in the new 21st century sciences of things like positive psychology, neuroscience, organizational learning and creativity, the economics of well-being, to name just some. And here's the sort of the pivotal moment for what happened. Martin Seligman, you may be aware of, often seen as the father or the founder of positive psychology, his inaugural address when he was the president of the American Psychological Association in 1998 was when he set out to bring scientific rigor to the issue of human flourishing, announcing this shift to a new science of human strength. It is my belief, he said, that since the end of the Second World War, psychology has moved too far away from its original roots, which were to make the lives of all people more fulfilling and productive, but is now too much involved with the important but not all important area of curing mental illness, we need to be able to show the world what actions lead to well-being, to positive individuals, to flourishing communities, and to a just society. He called for a reoriented science that would emphasize understanding and building of the most positive qualities of humanness. And that's what is now yielding some incredible, potent new ideas around how we could address the whole areas of how do we make great relationships, and how do we especially make great relationships at work. Click, please. I don't know about you, but this was kind of the model that I was brought up to believe, that if I worked hard and paid my taxes and was reasonably successful and did no harm and kept up to speed with what was demanded from me, I would eventually earn my happiness. My hard work might lead to success, and that success would lead me to being happy. Well, it turns out that there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever to support this belief. Some people work hard and are very successful, become very happy as a result, others do not. And we now know with certainty that it's not success and achievement itself that will make us happy. What we now know, and this changes everything, is that we've got it the wrong way round. Hard work and success do not necessarily make us any more happy or resilient, but, click, turn it on its head, and the opposite is entirely true and even causal. People who are happiest in their work produce more, accomplish more, are more successful, earn more, and certainly make more effective, flourishing relationships. The more happy we are at work, the more we're also able to learn and to develop and to be more creative as well. Click, please. Sean Aker, one of our favorite happiness at work researchers and experts, tells us this, that the old formula is broken, and waiting to be happier is actually limiting our brain's potential for success, whereas cultivating positive brains will make us more resilient, will make us more creative and productive, and this drives performance upwards and everything else that goes with us. New research in psychology and neuroscience is showing that we become more successful when we are happier and more positive. And this has huge relevance in our relationships too. Click, please. So what you're looking at here is some of the outcomes from the research of Jessica Price-Jones and her Science of Happiness. She worked with a lot of organizations to actually be able to try and understand what were the different qualities, critical criteria that seemed to be linked to happiness at work. And her definition of happiness at work, by the way, is people who feel they are achieving and exceeding their potential. So this isn't happiness where we all just feel happy, smiley, and everything's lovely. This is the happiness which often has highs and lows, which is often comes with it quite a high degree of challenge and the need to be resilient. But in that same sort of sense of challenge where we feel that we're still in the driver's seat and we can actually have some influence and impact over it. I've highlighted here the ones that are particularly relevant for our thinking today around relationships. People who are happier make better relationships. So, for example, the 2013 company that achieved the greatest the greatest jump in their employee happiness over 1 year was an American telecommunications company, Qualcomm, and this huge jump that they managed to get, a 30% increase in their happiness at work from people, was due to being able to make a happier work culture where people felt much more happier and comfortable in their relationships at work. And what they found was they've seen a successful growth in their business that matched that 30% increase in people's happiness at work ratings. Another study which you may be aware of, we've found that having strong relationships at school, for instance, is a far better predictor of later career success and earnings than in grades or exam results. So it is seeming increasingly certain that happy people make more successful relationships. Click, please. How then to be able to develop our happiness? And this is the current combined thinking from different experts that have looked at this question from a range of different disciplines. They are agreeing. I've looked at this research from dozens of different angles, and it's still seemingly to come up with these three ratios. So see what you think of this. This is from genetics, from neuroscience, from psychology, and from social science. Click, please. 50% of happiness, they're telling us, is what we're born with, our genetic predisposition. Some of us are born glass half full people, some of us are born glass half empty people. But it's only half of our happiness at most. Click, please. The other 8 to 10%, and this is the bit that surprises most of us when we first see it, comes from our circumstances. Only 8 to 10% of our happiness is actually being affected by our health, our wealth, our security, what's going on in our external world for us at the moment. That's only 8%. And the remaining 40 to 42% is coming from how we choose to respond to our circumstances and what we choose to do in response to what's happening to us, our voluntary choices. So this means that for every single one of us, we have the capacity to become happier, to raise our sort of levels of happiness. The other thing too that's worth saying about the set point, that 50%, it's not actually a fixed point, it's a range. So that even inside that, we're increasingly finding that by thinking about sort of some of the skills that go with developing optimism, developing positivity, playing to our strengths, learning how to increase our capacity to pay attention to appreciation, to the things, being able to give more to relationships that therefore then give us back more, because as you'll see in a minute, the quality of our relationships has a really strong and critical relation to how happy we feel. But that set point is a range, and we can operate at the higher or lower end of our range. Click, please. We can all learn to be happier. And the key conclusion from this is that work won't make us happier, but we can make ourselves happier at work if we accept, and these are Jessica Bryce-Jones' 4 guiding principles with this. Firstly, we're each responsible for our own levels of happiness. We could have a whole webinar on that one because it's a double-edged sword. To what extent does that you're responsible for your own levels of happiness become empowering, and to what extent does it become a bit of a poison chalice and something that allows other people to, if you like, absolve themselves from any responsibility for their duty of care over potentially our circumstances. Maybe we'll talk about that more in the question time. Secondly, you have more room for maneuver than you think. And I think that's a more helpful one, if you like, because it gives us all room to grow. There's always a choice, and self-awareness is the essential first step. Next slide, please. This is Martin Seligman's model. When he spent time actually thinking about, okay, what then are the fundamentals, the essential elements of flourishing? And you'll see he's put relationships right at the heart of this. PERMA, if you like, is his acronym for remembering this. And one of the things that are critical to flourishing, he tells us, is that we feel cared about and we have people in our lives that we care for. And what we're finding is this is just as true in our work context as it is in any other of our life contexts. Click, please. The other 4 of these, just so that you know, is positive emotion. This is the one that we'd recognize as feeling happy. For each of us, it's slightly different. But to what extent we feel satisfied that enough of our time we actually just feel happy. We feel we're enjoying, we're doing what we're doing. Engagement is that being in flow. It's that operating at the optimum of our strengths and challenge, where we just feel completely absorbed in what we're doing and playing to something that we care about and that uses our best strengths. Meaning is that sense that what we are doing is making a difference outside and beyond our own egos and self-interest. And achievement is the double whammy of pride and recognition, that we feel that what we are doing actually has worth in our own eyes, in our own terms, and we feel proud of what we've accomplished, and also is getting sufficient recognition back from the world. Click, please. This is very similar, if you like, to appreciative inquiry, which I'll look at in a moment, but here's a lovely quote from business coach Gary Lockwood that I thought just pulls these ideas together and also starts to increase our thinking about the importance of positivity. A lot of the research is showing us that perhaps most of us are failing to harness the incredible potency and power that positivity can give us to bring significant and substantial benefits to the quality of our relationships. Conventional wisdom, says Lockwood, says we should be working on improving our weaknesses. What a terrible waste of time, talent, and opportunity. Click, please. Focus on your strengths. Experience the immense satisfaction that comes with being superb at something. The point that he's making here is that we have grown up with a deficiency model, a default model that drills us into paying attention to what's not working, what's problematic. It'd be interesting for you to just have a think. How much of your work time is spent on giving your attention to things that are problematic, that are in some kind of area of needing to be fixed or improved because they are not as good as they should be? And how much of your time is spent on looking at the things that are flourishing, that are working really well, that are really successful, that are really enormous achievements? What we're finding, click please, and Cooper Ryder and Whitney knew this when they gave us appreciative inquiry, is that our biological predisposition for survival, which requires us to pay attention to things that are going wrong, because if there is a problem, we need to act on it. Our survival might depend on it. And that is important for survival, but it's rubbish for building out of the conditions of flourishing, because it means that we tend to devalue or not give enough importance to what we might learn, to what's working well, what we can appreciate because it's already successful, what wisdom we have from being able to use our strengths and play to our strengths. Gallup did a study and they found that managers who spent about 5 times as much time concentrating and talking about their people's strengths as they did on weaknesses and critiquing those things that needed to be improved were able to double the levels of engagement and productivity they had. And they concluded from this that if managers were to make just this one shift of upping the ratio of positive to negatives to 5 times, they would automatically double the level of employee engagement that people had at work. Next slide, please. And this is the golden ratio that you may have come across, the 3 to 5 positives to 1 negative. In general, when a human system contains between 3 to 5 as much positivity as negativity, it's significantly likely to thrive. If your ratio is below 1, you're probably feeling a little low or depressed. A ratio of between 1.5 to 2.5 is normal. That's more positivity than negative, but not by a large enough margin to really be able to trigger an upward spiral. And the 3 to 5 is when we really start to get the benefits. For instance, Marcel Losada observed teams of 8 when they were developing strategic plans. And what he found was in a business team with 5 times more positivity than negativity, the people in that team were significantly more likely to be making money and achieve higher ratings in their evaluations from colleagues and managers. When he delved a bit more into why this might be, what he found was that when there was 5 times as much positivity as negativity, people in those teams were much more readily able to shift between advocating their own beliefs and asking questions about the beliefs of others, between talking about themselves and between talking about others. It increases our receptivity. It widens our perceptions and our willingness and our interest and our curiosity in being able to absorb diverse and different views and opinions. Of course, we know that that is essential for working miracles. These findings have been subsequently confirmed in all sorts of different settings across a variety of different contexts and have been cited in now over 700 times. During dozens of experimental studies which raised the positivity ratio of participants, the increased positivity led to increased productivity, increased social capital, as well as increased well-being and physical health for individuals. Next slide, please. So I've said quite a bit about the importance of positivity and the importance of happiness, because I do think it is a bit of a game changer, that happiness is something that turns out to be far more substantial and critical to what happens next in terms of the results that we're achieving. And if we can think about and look at and explore ways to increase the levels of positivity, the levels of happiness that people are feeling, automatically that then opens up to dividends in terms of both results and relationships and any of the other areas that we aspire to achieve. I think now what I'd like to do is bring that into how that has an impact or an influence on our communication. So the first of this is just remembering, if we already know, recognizing the importance of emotional contagion. This idea that our emotions spread like a virus, and negative emotions will bring people down and create a sense of protectivism, narrow-mindedness, narrow thinking. But positivity will spread just as well. And what positivity does is opens up our brains to be more willing to accept new possibilities, to learn more, to accept and acknowledge and understand and empathize with other points of view. Another study, and a lot of this stuff comes from Daniel Goleman's research in empathy and social intelligence and his latest work in thinking about focus. And in Focus, Goleman talks about how talking about positive goals and dreams can be a much more positive way to encourage people. This is similar to what Richard Boyart, a psychologist at Cape Western Reserve University, found, that when we focus on what somebody needs to do to fix themselves or to fix a problem can effectively close them down to new possibilities. Whereas a conversation that starts with a person's dreams and hopes is more likely to yield, to lead to a fresh insight and fresh possibilities for action. New slide, please. And it's these ideas that Judith Glaser brings together in her work with conversational intelligence. According to Judith Glaser, the key to success in our relationships and work is to prime our brains for trust, for mutual respect, for partnership. And her ideas here are pulling from all of the things that I've just been talking about, taking the discoveries that have been made in the neuroscience field, and looking at also that understanding that biologically, when we are feeling threatened, when we are feeling uneasy, when we are feeling uncertain, that triggers our lower, more primitive brain that ramps us into survival mode. And therefore, wouldn't it be more useful to think about what will help to activate the higher level intelligences, such as integrity, empathy, and good judgment? So here's her tips for us. Click, please. The first, click new slide, Janet, please. Thank you. Yeah, that's fine. We can hold that. So the first is from Judith Glaser. Our brains are designed to be social. Apparently, our need to belong is more powerful than our need for safety. So we've got any sort of fears of being rejected, of not feeling we belong, that's automatically going to activate our fear networks, causing us to move into sort of protect behavior. If we can focus on being inclusive and using physical and verbal connections, that will increase the level of oxytocin, which increases a sense of bonding. I worked with an executive team recently, and they spent a whole afternoon having a really fruitful, rich conversation, thinking about the university actually, thinking about what would mean that every part of their enterprise, both online and live, gave good welcome. What did they mean by good welcome? What might they do to actually immediately and substantially provide a sort of sense of good welcome to anybody as they entered their space? And that's the idea here with using this. The second idea here is about the importance of appreciation. That appreciation reshapes our neural networks, activating a whole large framework of neurons that enable us to see more broadly and to think bigger, so that we can better our relationships by focusing on appreciating others' perspectives, even when we don't agree with those. The next one is around empathy. The more we feel another person empathizes, really understands and gets how things are for us, what it's like from our point of view, the more safe we feel inside that, the more we are willing to be open and to be more comfortable sharing what's really on our mind. Whereas uncertainty will disturb our sense of security, so much so that we start to distrust even perhaps ourselves. The more we play to win, the more we lose. The idea here is that if we hear another person insisting on being right, insisting on having their point of view dominate our point of view, the more we will shut down. And instead, if we can focus on making it safe and to have a sense that the other person is curious and interested in what we have to bring, that will allow us to bring more in, because we will move towards pleasure, warmth, when we feel warmth from another person, and away from cold, distrust. If we can prime the conversational space for warmth and connection, automatically that will make better relationships. Next slide, please. So in summary, these are the ideas that all of these are kind of coming towards, and we may have a conversation next about how we can actually take that into a cynical or suspicious world. But it's helpful, I think, to just know some of the body of research that's coming through that's showing the benefits that these bring, that this isn't just about being nice for the sake of being nice or being a good person. Yes, that's good too, but they do actually bring extraordinary dividends in terms of the results that we can then achieve. Look for the good in others and express it to them. Proactively manage conflict. It's not about all just being nicey-nicey and glossing over any of the disagreements. We know from numerous research that the way teams actually allow conflict to be brought out into the open and used as part of the material to actually improve their thinking, test their thinking, build their thinking, the more robust and extraordinary will be the results that they'll be able to come up with. We build relationships through communication. We also build relationships through shared experience, and shared positive experience have profound benefits in terms of bonding our social connections. And the more we can spend time recognizing, celebrating success and achievement, the stronger we make our relationships. The last idea that I want to put in before I open up to questions and thoughts is perhaps the simplest, but it's not necessarily the easiest. Next slide, please. And it's perhaps if the one thing that we could all just take away from any of this, it's this. Alfred Brendel, classical pianist, Beethoven, specialist supremist, retired now, although a poet, turned new career into as a poet, points out that the word listen contains the same letters as the word silent. New slide. I think in the West we often think about listening as the absence of talking, whereas in actual fact listening is a very active and important presence. The most basic and powerful way to connect to another person is to listen. Just listen, says teacher and integrative medicine pioneer Rachel Naomi Remen. Perhaps the most important thing we can ever give each other is our attention. Click, please, Janet. Thank you. Sean Akers, Happiness at Work research that I was mentioning at the top of this slide. He eventually distilled his model into 7 principles, and the 7th is social investment. Because the more we put into the success of our relationships, he found the greater the returns we get back to advantage us, either to stay happy and productive and resilient, or whatever the challenges that we may be facing. His research has found that the most successful people turn outwards when things get tough, that social capital increases our well-being, our health, our happiness and resilience, and the better we feel about workplace relationships, the more effective we will be. Click, please. And the way that we can build that social investment is, first and foremost, to listen. Listen better, listen more. Ask questions. Become brilliant at the fine and difficult art of asking really terrific questions. Give. Give our time, give our attention, give real interest, give ourselves. One of the ways that we know will hugely improve relationships is when people give time, and in that way build a shared sense of collective vision, common purpose, interdependence. Next, please, Janet. This from Richard Shell, who runs Wharton's Success course. In the long run, we'll succeed because the people who truly matter in our lives appreciate us for who we really are and not who we're trying to be. Next slide. So just a couple of references. This is the Relate program on the Open University, which if you don't know about already, has lots more that you can delve into to learn about a lot of these themes. And next slide. This one is some of the references, or a lot of the references that I've drawn from in terms of making these ideas. That's my culmination of the different ideas that I've pulled together. With the time that we have left, I'd love now to hear what questions, what thoughts that you have in response to any of this, especially in terms of how we might use it.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. As I mentioned to you earlier, I have got a quick, well, not necessarily a quick question, but my question is, how can we convert the qualitative findings of our positive emotional work and turn it into quantitative, i.e. measurable findings? Today, I find that we're ever driven. We've got a culture in business of being measurement driven, and we need to sort of be able to prove that this is a good thing to do. We need to measure it.
Yeah.
Big question. Right. I'm not sure if you can help with that one.
I think it's a great question. I think it's an important question because I think a truism is, we find what we look to measure, and what we measure gets valued. And so I think that one of the things I applaud and I champion and I like about the new interest in attempting to measure our happiness and measure our well-being, however imprecise or too reductionist that may be, that at least in attempting to measure these things, our level of flourishing, our level of positivity, the level of how well our relationships are doing, the more we attempt to measure these things, the more they are being given value and worth. The second thing about this is, yes, we live in a machine world, which increasingly, I think, is leading us to believe that we can measure and therefore control absolutely everything. You may be aware Ian McGilchrist's wonderful, huge book, The Master and the Emissary, his idea that left brain thinking is usurping right brain thinking to the extent that we think that we can now control and dominate absolutely everything and reduce it down and measure it, is a part of the dominant culture, because it gives us a perhaps unhealthy and dangerous sense of optimism over how much control we have over things. That said, the new sciences are becoming clever and clever. So a lot of the research that I've fed into this today are actually putting numbers, they're actually putting statistics down onto what is the impact of happiness at work, for instance. What is the impact of a positive ratio, you know, being able to measure the positivity ratio in different kinds of contexts. So how we can convert the qualitative value ideas that we have of the things that matter into hard quantity, I think it's work in progress. I think we'll get it wrong as much as we get it right, but as long as we can keep having a dialogue about it and it still has a legitimate place on the table and gets the sorts of things like our human skills onto the table, then I think it's worth trying again and again.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I'm going to actually stop us there because we've run over a little bit on time, and I just wanted to say, yes, we were supposed to finish at 1:15.
So sorry.
But no, it was such a fascinating subject, and I didn't want to cut you short. I just want to thank everybody for giving up their lunchtime on such a lovely sunny day. I'm sure you'd all rather be in the park eating sandwiches and feeding ducks. But I do think you'll agree that this was a fascinating subject. And Mark, I personally really enjoyed it. I'm sure everybody else did. So I'd just like to say thank you very much indeed, and say goodbye to everyone. So thank you.
Thank you.